Ladies and gentlemen, seated, it is highest time to start our conference. Good morning. I'm Anna Fotyga, Polish member of the European Parliament, and on behalf of the ECR, I warmly welcome you to the European Parliament. We decided, together with spiritus movens of the Kalinowski Conference, Ambassador Žygimantas Pavilionis, Chair of Foreign Affairs Committee of Lithuanian Parliament, to hold this fourth edition of Kalinowski Forum here in Brussels, taking into account very important, challenging time. In just a few days, we expect the European Council to decide about candidacy status for three applying countries of the region. Ukraine defending its territory against the Russian waged war of aggression since February 24, and actually since 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. Also Moldova and Georgia. Allow me for a moment to switch to my native Polish, because I would like to greet my special guest. Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen, may I welcome very warmly those who have come here from Poland. May I welcome both the representatives of my electoral district, that is Pomerania, as well as the representatives of the Belarusian opposition that have come in great numbers, Georgia-Belarus. This day we would like to dedicate to discussing the situation in Belarus. In the context of this full-scale invasion. The invasion that started on the 24th of February.
To give the floor to my dear friend, co-host of this conference, Ambassador Žygimantas Pavilionis, chairperson of Kalinowski Conference. As you noted, the name of this conference, name of the forum, is after the hero of three nations, Poland, Lithuania, and Belarus, one of the leaders of the November uprising that was conducted on territory of then occupied Poland and Grand Duchy of Lithuania, also comprising current territories of Belarus. This conference is prepared jointly by ECR, the Lithuanian Seimas, Lithuanian Parliament, and Office of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. And I warmly welcome all the participants. Žygimantas, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Minister Fotyga and all friends in European Parliament. Best regards from my Prime Minister, who is just behind, and all the members of Lithuanian Parliament. As you see, we are sitting in a plenary today, and this is the reason that I cannot join you physically, but my heart is very much with you. And, you know, this is a historic week where we all come united, finally. While Lithuanians and Poles, they were fighting for this union for 2 decades. Honestly, we were quite alone trying to stop empowerment of Putin's empire 20 years ago, when we've been trying to tell to our European brothers and sisters that this is not time to invest into his regime when he's killing democracy in Russia. And I still remember my last conversation with Vladimir Kara-Murza before he went to Moscow to be imprisoned, that we have to fight for democracy in Russia. But finally, this week in June European Council, I hope we will take those historic decisions on Ukraine, Moldova's candidacy for the membership in European Union, and European perspective for Georgia. I still remember how important it was, such a decision for Lithuania, but Belarus should stay in focus. This is the most difficult issue, but I am quite sure that today we are not only united on European fronts, we are also united on Eastern fronts, because we just have one enemy. It's Putin's regime. If Ukrainians win, Putin regime will end its aggression, and that will be the beginning of freedom in Belarus. We know it well. We have to be prepared. That's why we have to support all Belarusian democratic leaders who are in Vilnius, in Poland, in all our capitals. And finally, we will create Europe whole and free. Finally, it will be the 4th wave of democratization that we are all waiting. And Lithuanians and Poles, together with our brothers in Europe and across the Atlantic, we will have to create that zone of peace, stability, and freedom. This decision will be important in Brussels, but it's a decade or more of our common work that we will have to commence from this week. Thank you so much, Minister Anna Fotyga. You've been always with us through all those decades, and let's continue our hard work. And all the best to the conference.
Absolutely. We used to cooperate while in national politics, in respective governments, and we continue cooperation. Now, Ambassador Pavilionis, thank you for this. You'll listen to Ambassador Pavilionis once more later during this conference. He is to moderate extremely important panel as well. Hopefully voting in the Lithuanian parliament allow him to participate very actively. Still, we stay in touch, and we are able to replace each other in case of emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, we would like to launch the conference with important pre-recorded statements. And allow me first to announce statement by Polish Prime Minister, His Excellency Mateusz Morawiecki. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki is extremely important for this cause, supporting of Belarusian free society and opposition, because of his personal history. He was probably one of the youngest dissidents against communist rule, fighting bravely imprisoned and even beaten in prison. So his understanding of your situation is excellent. Panie premierze, bardzo proszę.
Dear participants of the Kalinowski Conference, we meet today against the backdrop of 4 months of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. It's been almost 4 months since Ukraine has been fighting for its freedom and ours. This war will have tremendous consequences for our security, for the future of Ukraine, and also for the future of Belarus. We all feel that this is a turning point in European history. Within a couple of weeks, Russia was able to destroy the international order which had stood for decades. This creates a serious danger for our security, but also an opportunity to rebuild and improve the old system. 2 years ago, something happened, something which Lukashenko did not expect. Hundreds of thousands of Belarusians went to the streets to fight for their rights. There started a process which cannot be stopped, neither by putting activists in jail for political reasons, nor by persecuting and intimidating thousands of people for independent thinking. Belarusian society has changed and is ready to join the family of free and democratic countries. We will stand on the side of democratic Belarus. Belarusian Democrats can count on our support according to their needs. Apart from that, this is what we should do right now. First, help Ukraine to stop and repel Russian troops. Saving Ukraine will be the most powerful signal for Belarusian society that change is possible. Second, provide support for Belarusians, both those who were forced to flee their country as well as those who still live under Lukashenko's authoritarian regime. Third, help you free Belarusians to stay visible on the international scene. We want you to stay as an important part of Euro-Atlantic family. I'm aware that this is not an easy task, but during my meetings with Belarusians, both the leaders of the democratic opposition as well as regular citizens, I can feel such determination and decisiveness that I have no doubt that we are closer than ever to fulfilling Kalinowski's will and to ensuring freedom for all nations in our region.
Now, I'm sorry, it's Prime Minister of Lithuania. Ambassador, would you like to introduce the Prime Minister?
Maybe just a few words. You know, my Prime Minister Ingrida was at all the rallies in Vilnius before even, coming to power. She's wholeheartedly with Belarusian freedom. And yes, we consider Belarus as part of European nations, but she's just behind me, as you see, voting, and she cannot join us. So best regards to Prime Minister, and I think we have to proceed with her speech.
Of Kalinowski Forum. Dear colleagues, dear friends of Free Belarus. I'm happy that the Kalinowski Forum, launched in Lithuania, is growing and entering new, wider waters. That all those fighting for the same cause, a free and democratic Belarus, have gathered for the second time this year, and for the first time at the heart of Europe, the European Parliament. All the more regretful that this also happens to be the first Kalinowski Forum I'm not able to attend. So thank you for the opportunity to address you via this video. I must admit though that it is not easy to find something new to say, addressing this forum for the fourth time in a row. So much has been said, and so much easier said than done. But let me share what has been worrying me for quite some time now. Shrinking attention span. Difficulties to concentrate, inability to focus, getting easily distracted and bored, jumping from one task to another without finishing either of them, desire for quick results and lack of motivation to carry through with the long-term tasks that require stamina and determination, seeking scapegoats while unwilling to admit one's own mistakes and learn from one's own failures. These are some of the popular sins we tend to attribute to the younger generations, the millennials. The generations X, Y, and Z that some admire for their dynamism, freedom, and creativity. I know I do. And the generations so many of us are simply scared of. Because one day, relatively soon, they will push us out of our hard-earned positions into oblivion. Because, well, that's the circle of life. And it is scary to be ousted as irrelevant, even if not today, but inevitably, and soon enough. What is scarier, though, is that all these characteristics that we look down on and write off as negative effects of the digital age, distracted attention, impatience, reluctance, or pure inability to learn a lesson, they are just as well attributable to us, specifically to our external policy, to the foreign policy we carry out on a national level, but even more so, unfortunately, to the European external policy. And if we don't look in the mirror and dare to notice our behavioral patterns, if we carry on repeating them time and again, we, the politicians, we, Europe, risk becoming irrelevant and pushed into oblivion. Bombings in Russia as a prelude to Putin's war on Chechnya in 1999, cyber blitzkrieg on Estonia in 2007, 11 days of war in Georgia in August 2008, the illegal annexation of Crimea and the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine in 2014. The list goes on and on. Each and every time our minds would be preoccupied with a new headline of the day, of the month, of the year, we would say never again. We would promise our full and unwavering support to those oppressed and occupied, and our voice to those silenced. And yet, time and again, the headlines would shift to another tragedy or victory, another hero or victim of the day, of the month, of the year. And so would our attention. We would reiterate our commitment, but rarely devote sufficient time and efforts to the course of yesterday, of last month, of last year. Our lessons would remain unlearned. And in the blind spot of our distracted attention, dictators would continue to thrive. They would grow stronger and become ever more aggressive, both towards their own people and internationally. On the 24th of February, our world seemed to have changed forever as Russia launched a full-scale military offensive on Ukraine. We finally started calling a war, and an aggressor an aggressor. The atrocities in Bucha, Borodenka, Irpin, Mariupol, Chernihiv, crimes against humanity and a genocide. For a short while, we had the clarity of mind. We were united, focused, and determined. Not even 100 days passed, and new headlines emerged, suggesting we should seek ways of saving Putin's face. Ukraine should trade its territories in exchange for peace. The West should consider bargaining with Lukashenko, perhaps even lifting sanctions in exchange of Ukrainian grain for Africa and Belarusian potash for Latin America. As if Lukashenko was not an accomplice of Russia's war against Ukraine. As if there were no political murders in Belarus in 1999-2000. As if there was no bombing of the Minsk metro in 2011. As if Lukashenko didn't rig the constitution and the elections time and again in 1994, 2001, 2006, 2010, 2015, 2020, and as if the demands of peaceful crowds on the street of Belarus have been forgotten since August 2020. And all of those thousands of political prisoners lost their freedom for nothing. As if all of those free-spirited Belarusians living in exile in Lithuania, Poland, and elsewhere in Europe, and those who have found refuge in Ukraine, only to become refugees again, do not deserve a chance at a free and democratic future at their own home. As if we haven't witnessed more than once that the easing of sanctions would only lead to further and stronger repressions in Belarus. And as if we don't know that if allowed, Lukashenko would rid elections, break lives, imprison hopes, expel the future of Belarus time and again, and on our watch. With a carte blanche, we willingly hand over to him because of our difficulties to carry through with the long-term tasks that require stamina and determination, because of our shrinking attention span, because of our reluctance or inability to learn a lesson. We cannot let this happen, or else we too, Europe, the collective West, will be ousted as irrelevant, pushed into oblivion. For what we are good for, if we can only declare, but not defend, what we stand for: democracy, freedom, dignity, the basic rights and lives of those who seek our support, of those to whom we promised our support, who count on us to be heard and seen, not forgotten, and not traded as a bargaining chip. So today, while we are still focused on helping Ukraine win this war against the Russian tyranny, let us do everything we can to keep up with our promises to support the free people of Belarus. They need this support more than ever. Let us not hesitate. As the free people and the leaders of the free Belarus do not hesitate to choose the side of truth and good after the 24th of February, let us not lose neither hope nor patience. Let us not lose sight of what matters. Let's stand for the freedom of Ukraine, of Belarus, and of our own. That is what Konstanty Kalinowski would do. Slava Ukraini and Живе Belarus.
We are really very grateful for powerful messages of both heads of government of Poland and Lithuania, and I'm not sure whether Ambassador Pavilionis is connected. Would you like to introduce our third speaker?
Well, maybe just a few words. I still remember when our parliament was first to call Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya a president of Belarus. We still maintain that she is the president that is ousted from power. We have full support for her team in Vilnius, and we think that one day we will all celebrate free and fair elections in Belarus that will bring Belarus to Europe. So let's listen to what President Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is willing to say to us.
And gentlemen, I would like to thank Anna Fotyga and Žygis Pavilionis for organizing the 4th Kalinowski Conference. Thank you on behalf of Belarusians for standing with us. I was in Brussels yesterday. My team told me that Joachim Lillevel, famous history professor at Vilnius University, lived there in exile in the 1830s. He was exiled from then Russian Empire for coining the phrase that inspired generations of freedom fighters to come: for our freedom and yours. In the 1860s, 30 years later, inspired by Lillevel's motto, Kęstutis Kalinowski headed the liberation uprising in Belarus and Lithuania. He fought for our freedom and yours. 160 years later, at striking factories and women's marches, at ballot stations and in prisons, on the streets of Minsk and in cyberspace, Belarusians peacefully defended the values that uphold our freedom and yours. 160 years later, Ukrainians are fighting for the future of Europe. In the trenches of Donbass, skies of Kiev, or streets of Kherson, they are fighting for our freedom and yours. I feel outraged that our country has been dragged into a lawless invasion by a dictator who represents only himself. But I feel proud for the Belarusians who have stood up against it. I feel proud for thousands of those who took the streets in February, knowing the risks of prison and torture. I feel proud for those who sabotaged railways in March and April. They now face up to capital punishment for their bravery. I feel proud for the hundreds of Belarusian volunteers who are defending Ukraine right now. I feel proud for thousands of ordinary Belarusians who continue to donate to the Ukrainian army and people. I also feel hopeful about Europe. I'm happy that last week the European Commission recommended extending EU candidacy status to Ukraine and Moldova. Along with other leaders of the Belarusian democratic forces, I called for this decision. It would confirm that not only Ukrainians want to be with Europe, but also Europe wants to be with Ukraine. It would acknowledge the fact that Ukrainians are fighting for European freedom too. I urge you to remember that the destinies of Ukraine, Europe, and Belarus are interconnected. There can be no free Ukraine without free Belarus, and vice versa. And I'm sure history taught us Europe cannot be safe unless both of our nations are free. There can be no freedom for you without freedom for us. So, behind the roar of tanks and blinding headlines, I urge you not to forget about Belarus. I urge you to remember one simple thing. Belarus is not Russia, and Belarusians don't support the war. By helping our struggle for freedom, you are bringing prosperity for Ukraine and Europe closer. As the EU is deciding on new candidates, now is the moment to confirm in the debate's final document a European perspective for Belarus. We must start the conversation about the forms of engagement between the Belarusian nation and the European Union. As we move towards strategic goals, I ask you to advance ideas that will bring Belarus and the EU closer. Mobility of Belarusians, opening visas, launching student exchanges and educational programs. Anything that doesn't involve the regime only helps. And we should support the people and pressure the regime. We should work together on a strategic media campaign to counter Russian propaganda. Together we can create an alternative narrative of free Belarus that belongs in Europe. Lastly, together with the Council of Europe, we are formulating decisions that would set up participation of a real democratic Belarus in the work of this authoritative organization. An example that I hope will prove to be successful to be extended to other international organizations. Belarusians united in 2020. We also united Europe and the world around us. 2022 is a critical test for our unity. And only by standing together can we ensure our freedom and yours.
We are really very grateful for Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya's presence yesterday, this statement, this message to Kalinowski Forum was recorded yesterday during her stay. She was able to engage in debates with MEPs who were able to arrive to Brussels earlier. She had to leave for Strasbourg earlier because of yesterday airport strikes, but of course welcomes this conference. It is time to announce our fourth pre-recorded speaker, the EU Commissioner for Neighbourhood and Enlargement, Mr. Oliver Verhelyi.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to address this conference. The discussion today will focus on the future of Belarus. However, besides the victims of the repression, our thoughts are also with the people of Ukraine, who are fighting for their life and for their country. Let me reassure you that Belarus remains high on our agenda, and we maintain our firm support for the people of Belarus. In many ways, the Belarusian and Ukrainian struggles are part of the same ongoing drive for freedom and democracy, and both deserve our strong and steadfast support. The European Union has stood by the people of Belarus from the very beginning of their legitimate request for a democratic future. The harsh attempt of the Belarusian authorities to silence people cannot go without impunity. We have shown zero tolerance for Lukashenko's repression and his involvement in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We have suspended all of our engagement with the central authorities. At the same time, we have imposed a serious list of sanctions which aim to isolate the Belarusian authorities. Since August 2020, the EU has committed over 65 million euros to the people of Belarus, directly supporting victims of repression, civil society, independent media, youth and scholarships, small businesses, health and culture. Civil society actors on the front line have received emergency assistance to resist the regime's repressive actions and secure their activities. Belarusian students forced to leave the country benefit from educational opportunities in the EU. Thanks to our support, independent journalists and social media influencers continue to tell the truth and reach their audiences in Belarus. Moreover, with our 3 billion euros comprehensive plan of economic support for a democratic Belarus, we stand ready to invest significantly in the country if it decides to embark on a democratic transition. The EU is and remains fully committed to supporting the people of Belarus, and the EU will continue to stand by their side in their wish for change, democracy, and an open future. I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Panels of the Kalinowski Forum. We start with the first general geopolitical one entitled The Battle for Freedom, Lukashenko's regime in the context of war, I would add war of aggression against Ukraine. It is this context of war against Ukraine is the leading topic of whole conference. I would like to also to mention that MEPs, members of the European Parliament representing major political groups within the Parliament are to attend this conference, also engaging during various panels. Altogether, there are 4 panels, and without much ado, allow me to introduce our first speaker. I kindly ask all panelists to limit their first statements to roughly 5 minutes, and then we'll have some more time for next round. First speaker is, it's a pleasure for me to introduce him, Ambassador Paweł Herczyński, Polish diplomat, currently acting director for CSDP and crisis response within the European External Action Service. Panie ambasadorze, bardzo proszę.
Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador,
Minister, and first and foremost, it's a great privilege for me to be here today. Thank you for your leadership and organizing this fourth Kalinowski conference here in the premises of the European Parliament. Clearly, Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine has changed our focus. But we certainly do not forget that the brutal repression of all independent voices still continues in Belarus. There are now more than 1,200 political prisoners. All walks of life are targeted. Media workers, lawyers who defend political prisoners, human rights defenders, ordinary citizens who manifest any criticism of the system. The political opposition to Lukashenko is either in prison or in exile. The continuing brutal repression clearly demonstrates that there is no change in the fundamentals of Belarusian politics, brutal repression and no respect for individuals. We continue to call for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners, and we do our utmost to bring the dire conditions of detention to the attention of the authorities through the interventions of our delegation in Minsk. And I'm really happy that our ambassador is sitting next to me. On top of this already dire situation, Lukashenko has made Belarus full accomplice of Russian war in Ukraine by providing its territory and its infrastructure at the disposal of the Russian troops. By this, he has further jeopardized the country's sovereignty. Despite recent pacific rhetoric from the leadership of the country, including from Lukashenko himself, Russian troops are still using Belarusian territory for shelling targets in Ukraine. At the same time, Lukashenko seems to want to avoid direct participation in the war, but his increasing dependence on Russia may oblige him eventually to send Belarusian troops to Ukraine. It remains unclear how much room of maneuver vis-à-vis Russia he still enjoys. In addition, the Belarusian constitution was amended also to delete the reference to Belarus' non-nuclear status, which opens Belarus for possible deployment of Russian nuclear missiles. The support to Russia's war has triggered EU's strong condemnation, but also further restriction of contacts with Belarusian public officials and further sanctions. The listings under the Belarus sanctions regime are among the most robust in the EU history. We have introduced so far 6 packages of sanctions, and in total, nearly 200 persons and 35 entities have been listed as a response to the situation in Belarus. We have also introduced targeted sanctions on 7 economic sectors and an overflight ban for Belarusian aircrafts, this following the outrageous Ryanair flight forced diversion. We have finally targeted Belarusian top military officials and some entities as part of the so-called Russia sanctions packages that the European Union agreed upon in reaction to the aggression. Many like-minded partner countries, United States, UK, Canada, Japan, Australia, have introduced similar measures and are adapting them continuously. The overall objective is to adopt a set of comprehensive and complementary measures capable of creating maximum pressure on Russia and Belarus. We are similarly determined to respond through our restrictive measures in the continuing expressions and violations of human rights in Belarus. The European Union is fully engaged in holding the Belarusian authorities to account in relevant international organizations, particularly OSCE and the UN Human Rights Council. At the same time, we have presented a comprehensive plan of economic support for democratic Belarus, which, once Belarus embarks on its democratic transition, would be worth of up to €3 billion. We continue to call on Belarusian authorities to seek a peaceful and democratic solution to the crisis through an inclusive national dialogue with broader society, and we are ready to contribute to these efforts. The European Union stands by the people of Belarus, and we support their democratic choice and fundamental freedoms. We also strongly condemn the involvement of Belarus in aggression against Ukraine and call on it to refrain from such action and to abide by its international obligations. We stand by Ukraine, we stand by Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It is important time preceding NATO summit that we expect to adopt important decisions as well, and therefore my pleasure and privilege to welcome high-ranking NATO official, Assistant Secretary General Ambassador Baiba Braza. Madam, floor is yours.
Yes. Oh. All right, it works, I think. Thank you, Minister. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Members of European Parliament, ambassadors, colleagues, Kalinowski was one of the leaders of Lithuanian, Polish, and Belarusian national revival. He was also the leader of January uprising of 1863. It shows a close relationship between the countries, but also between the people. And the fact that Kalinowski Brigade today fights for Ukrainian sacred war, for its freedom and independence, of course, is a sign in that. When we look at Belarus, why would NATO, one could ask, why would NATO care about freedom and democracy in Belarus? And we have identified two very closely related answers. First, because NATO is based on the principles of guarding freedom, sovereignty, and liberty of our people and territories. And second, because free and democratic countries don't attack neighbors. So freedom matters. Thus, the struggle for democracy and sovereignty by the people of Belarus matters for NATO. Today, Belarus and its regime has enabled attack against the free people of Ukraine. Of course, we as allies have been very clear in the condemnation and in practical support to Ukraine and in doing everything what we can to ensure that Ukrainian will and ability to fight is maintained. And we will do that in a united and strong way in the future. That will be reaffirmed both in terms of values, in the strategic concept of NATO that we are currently negotiating, but also in the NATO summit itself, both by strengthening the deterrence and defense of the allies, by making sure that we reaffirm the values on which NATO is based upon, and also by making sure that our partners across the globe know that we are willing and ready to work with them. And Belarus was once a partner for NATO. Since 1992, Belarus engaged in very close relationship with NATO. It received more than 60 projects, supported projects for science, peace, and security. It participated in civil emergency exercises, attended meetings, worked with NATO, with allies, on an everyday basis. However, very clearly, with deterioration of the situation within Belarus, suppression of human rights, rigged elections in 2006 and after, the relationship with NATO also deteriorated. And the allies' assessment of relationship with Belarus changed. Obviously, the breakdown since 2020 has been very obvious. Today, we have suspended all cooperation projects with Belarus. However, it doesn't mean that we give up on the future of Belarus. freedom, sovereignty of the country and the great nation of Belarusian people stands. We are interested in free and democratic Belarus. It is a country that borders European Union member states, that borders allies of NATO. While Belarus is under authoritarian oppression by its regime, Europe cannot feel safe and secure. So Belarus matters for NATO. I thank you.
Ambassador Braza, thank you very much indeed for your statement. And now I would like to give the floor to the EU ambassador to Belarus in exile. Yesterday we were able to talk about the decisions taken by Minsk. He was the fourth in a row after Polish, Lithuanian, and Latvian ambassadors. Later, I understand there were others, French as well as I remember. But I think that it is extremely important now to listen to Ambassador Dirk Schäuble, who stays in Brussels. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fotyga. First of all, great many thanks for the invitation to this important event today. I think it is very important also because Belarus needs to stay on the agenda at a time when everybody looks at Ukraine. I'm very happy also to see many of my Belarusian friends here in the room. That is very important to have them here. I will try not to be too repetitive because obviously what Pavel Haczynski said is very similar to what I intended to say, but nevertheless I try to make some nuances. First of all, 24th of February has of course changed everything once again. Until 24th of February, we had one big problem with Belarus, which was the human rights situation, which is terrible. Since 24th of February, we have a second problem, and that is Lukashenko's active participation in this war. He is not only a facilitator, he has also been a complicit, and this does not stop, unfortunately, even though the main part of the Russian troops currently have left the Belarusian territory. There are plans to create the Southern Operational Command and a Southern Combat Readiness checks, which keep part of the Ukrainian army away from where the soldiers should be, namely in the east and in the south. And that means that is, of course, part of the plan. He is also promoting Putin's information manipulation and disinformation with regarding to the food security issue, the grain in particular. He's repeating all of these lies that we unfortunately are hearing from the Kremlin propaganda machinery. On the war, very important it is to note that the vast majority of Belarusians do not support the country's involvement in Putin's war. According to independent sociological polls, nearly 90% of Belarusians oppose the entry of Belarusian troops into Ukraine. Western sanctions, Pavel spoke about this, are hitting the Belarusian economy more and more painfully. The latest figures are the GDP contracted sharply by 3.4% year-on-year in the first 5 months of 2022, meaning that in May 2022, the GDP decreased by 8.6% year-on-year. Industrial production down by more than 10% in April, inflation high at 17%, foreign trade continues to shrink. So therefore we can expect that sooner or later Lukashenko will try to resume his usual balancing act, which he has often done after sanctions were imposed by the West, while pursuing its belligerent rhetoric and maintaining its complicity. Of course, the regime has already started to make some attempts to distance themselves from Moscow and to gain some independent standing in the region. And in particular, I think the narrative by Lukashenko that is used where he says we are not part of this war, unfortunately is believed by some players, by some people inside Belarus. Political prisoners. The situation is worse than ever. As Pavel already mentioned, more than 1,200 political prisoners. That's the official number that Vyazna is able to count and to verify. Probably there are many more. Free press, independent media, brutally repressed. Any attempts to protest are dangerous. Only following the so-called constitutional referendum at the end of February, around 1,000 persons were arrested. I will be slow. Okay, sorry. 5 minutes. 5 minutes you give me is tight. What we believe is that also due to the probably delayed effect of the sanctions, that we need strategic patience. We will continue with our sanctions pressure if the situation does not improve in the country. As Mr. Haczynski said, the sixth package has just been adopted, and we have two sixth packages. Don't mix them up. We have the sixth package on the Russian invasion in Ukraine, in which Belarus is part, and sixth package also on internal Belarusian sanctions, and we will continue, of course, on both sides. So we expect very significant steps by the Lukashenko regime if they want to start talking to us again. Everything is listed very clearly in the October 2020 Council conclusions. Basically, there's nothing that needs to be added. Everything what we expect from the regime is mentioned there. Unfortunately, Lukashenko's room for maneuver, his capacity of independent decision-making in the area of foreign military policy has become much more limited in the last 2 years due to his own fault. With the presence of Russian troops in the country, obviously the sovereignty is also under threat. And unfortunately, this is all done to keep for his own personal power ambitions and not for the sake of the country. Belarus' economic dependence on Russia also became critical. Energy subsidies, industrial cooperation, direct financial support by Russia are necessary to keep Belarus' economy afloat amid the growing sanctions pressure from the West. Needless to say that the fate of Mr. Lukashenko and the regime depends on the further dynamics in the war on Ukraine and on the outcome of the war. That is very clear. A few words on what we have done. I will not repeat the sanctions part because that was already quite detailedly explained by Pavel Haczynski. Perhaps just to say what we have done for the Belarusian civil society and for the democratic forces over the last 2 years. First of all, I think we should say that we have reshuffled all our financial support away from the regime to the people of Belarus. Needless to say as well that it is not easy to provide the support to them inside Belarus at this moment, but still we are doing quite a good job, I believe. Since August 2020, we have paid 65 million euros to the democratic forces and to civil society in particular. 3.7 million for emergency support for the victims of oppression and independent media. We committed also 24 million more for civil society, 6 million to help small and medium-sized enterprises who are abroad, now Belarusian companies, 1 million for independent media and civil society support, and now we have also for 2022 another future package ready, 25 million euros for the civil society in Belarus. Perhaps also to say that the war in Ukraine has also had direct consequences for Belarusian activists. Some of the activists had to flee the Lukashenko regime and they settled in Kiev or in Ukraine. Only that they had to flee a second time after the Russians started bombing Ukraine, and some of them had to take their things yet again. I know one friend of mine who has still his things in Kiev because he was on a business trip on the 24th of February and couldn't go back. So this is something that will also need our attention, in particular also not to discriminate in the European Union against those Belarusians who are not in favor of the regime, who had to flee and who want to settle down. I think we know a few examples and we're trying to help them as well with visa and with all what they need at this moment. So to sum it up, we need strategic patience and we will have the strategic patience and we stand with Belarus. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for your statement. I still remember the remote mission of the European Parliament to Minsk during COVID and engagement with you, remote engagement with you still in office. So we here in the European Parliament, we well remember your mission and your activity. Once ambassador, always ambassador. So I would like to introduce our next speaker. Once upon a time, he used to be the Belarusian ambassador to Warsaw, and I met him during this time. Now he is once more in Warsaw, in exile as refugee, opposing one of important leaders of opposition opposing the Lukashenko regime. I speak about Ambassador Paweł Łatuszka, currently head of National Anti-Crisis Management. Ambassador Łatuszka, floor is yours. Remote connection.
If you permit me, I will use Belarusian language. I think that is very important for Belarusian today show our identity. Шановна господа старшиня, поважаные депутаты Европарламента, коллеги.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, evil must not have spheres of influence. No country in the world may be in the sphere of influence of an evil force. In the coming days, a decision will be taken on whether to grant the European Union candidate status to Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. All three countries, to varying degrees, were previously mistakenly considered to be Russia's sphere of influence, and all of them are victims of its aggressive neo-imperial policies. They all have paid too high a price for this erroneous judgment of the civilized world. Right now, an unimaginable price is being paid by Ukraine, yet again. But independent, freedom-loving peoples and countries cannot and must not be considered a sphere of influence of this absolute evil called the Russian world. And right now, the United Europe has a historic opportunity to prove just that. To demonstrate in practice that all countries that are striving to break out of this Russian world will receive all the support they need from the civilized world. Today I would like to remind you that in Europe there is another country that has been striving to achieve the very same thing, this country of Belarus. And here is our message to United Europe. We are not the Russian world. We do not belong to the Russian sphere of influence. We are a European people under Russian occupation and the dictatorship of Putin's puppet, namely Lukashenko. And this is the result of our common mistakes committed by us and you, and we must work on them. We must make a principled choice that will be important both for us and for you. So this choice is a choice between good and evil, and there are no half tones there. We, the people of Belarus, we choose good, and all the latest polls so show this. Most Belarusians have been opposing the war. Most Belarusians are in favor of the European option rather than in favor of the so-called Russian world, the Ruski Mir. And at a certain point we thought that we couldn't escape from Russia because of our geopolitical position, but we have realized that it is not the proximity to Russia that should define our civilizational choice. It is not what determines our values. It is not what determines our vision for the future of Belarus as an independent, free, democratic and developed country. Unfortunately, it is this geographic proximity to Russia that poses a threat to the future of Belarus. And this threat becomes even stronger. The stronger it is, the stronger is the conviction of the rest of the world that Belarus is within the Russian sphere of influence. There is this well-known saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for the good people to do nothing. And there is nothing more damaging to this people's agency than this delusion that something is beyond their sphere of influence. Now, today, we're witnessing this terrible war in Ukraine. It shows to us the impact of such an approach. Basically, it means the occupation of a European country, the occupation of Belarus, and also it means a war waged against another country, namely Ukraine. Back in 2020, the Belarusians took to the street en masse to protest against the elections that were stolen from them. This is when Russia declared its readiness to provide military support to Lukashenko. In 2022, the Russian troops entered Belarus under the pretense of holding exercises, and they never left the territory of Belarus. And they invaded Ukraine on February 24th. So, thus, with the consent and full support of Lukashenko, and Lukashenko is but Putin's puppet, there has been this, we have seen this occupation. And by what right did Russia prepare and decide to interfere in the internal affairs of Belarus in 2020? How come it decided that Belarus could be used as a springboard to wage war in 2022? And they are basically waging war in other countries, in the countries that they consider to be within their sphere of influence. But the question is, what the world is going to do? Is the world going to consent? Is the world going to simply accept the Russian statement that Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova are Russia's spheres of influence? 3 out of 4 countries that I have mentioned have already taken a decision, declared that they are choosing Europe rather than Russia. They have made their choice, their civilizational choice. And it is time for Belarus to make the choice too. But what do we need to do that? I believe that Belarus and Europe need to take 3 major steps to meet. So, the first step that Belarus should take, Belarus represented by democratic forces. So, a transitional democratic government needs to be set up. Basically, it's already happened. It happened on February the 24th, and Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is responsible for that. This transitional government could be this alternative to this illegal, illegitimate, and puppet government that is controlled by Lukashenko. Step 2. National liberation movement needs to start to fight the Russian occupation and Lukashenko's puppet regime. Step 3, to make this European choice. Europe needs to be chosen so that Belarus becomes an independent democratic state and a part of Europe. But for all that, we need your support, your help. So what are we expecting of you? Step number 1. Lukashenko's illegitimate and puppet regime needs to be completely isolated in the international arena. They need to be excluded from all international organizations. And in their place, you need to invite the representatives of the Belarusian democratic forces. Step 2, basically, it needs to be recognized that Russia is occupying Belarus, and you need to recognize this democratic transitional government. Step 3, you need to support this European choice of ours. You would have to support this independent Belarus, we Belarusians are ready to move forward. And basically, we understood what is necessary in 2020, and now we are striving towards freedom and independence, towards the free Europe. So take these steps. Come closer. Let us follow this path towards light, common security and prosperity. Let us do that together. Thank you so very much.
Indeed, Ambassador, thank you for this concise. Our next speaker currently strategy and security at Exeter University, UK. Formerly Deputy Assistant Secretary General of NATO. I speak about Professor Jamie Shea. Floor is yours.
Dear Minister, dear Chairperson, dear Anna, most importantly of all, many thanks for inviting me to join this very august group here on the podium. Delighted to be back among friends. 5 minutes, particularly for me, is a real challenge. I usually need 5 minutes to get through my jokes routine at the beginning of a presentation. No, it's a discipline that you're never too old to begin to learn. Obviously, I will join the chorus of condemnation of the Lukashenko regime, lamentations about the increasing totalitarian character of the Belarusian state, encouragement and support for the opposition. But I also think that it's important not simply to fix Belarus, with, of course, the cooperation of the Belarusian people, but to fix the region. And while fixing Belarus, at least in the short term, given the increasing rapprochement between Putin and Lukashenko, may be difficult, we don't have any immediate levers apart from continuing with the sanctions. We can do quite a bit about fixing the region. And it's quite clear that the more we're able to push the region in a democratic direction, strongly linked to the EU, a big decision, of course, this week, strongly linked to NATO, giving these countries a genuine European perspective, the better chance we have, of course, of encouraging the Belarusian opposition to believe that the European future is really palpable and real for them as well, a motivating factor, and the better chance we have of detaching Belarus from Russia ultimately. So what I would like to do is to make a few quick comments on fixing the region. To my mind, there are 5 things that we need to turn our attention to. Number one, NATO has to fill the security vacuum in its own member states in Central and Eastern Europe, and to establish effective deterrence against, obviously, a more assertive Russia and a Russian threat which is no longer unthinkable. The Madrid summit in a couple of days' time is a good chance to do that. What should we look for? Well, first of all, a serious commitment by NATO member states to establish a more permanent, more robust presence on the eastern flank, while preserving a sufficiently flexible rotational reserve force behind in Germany or in Poland to be able to deal with any Russian attack wherever it would occur. Secondly, to integrate Finland and Sweden rapidly into the alliance. So we learned the painful lesson of Georgia and Ukraine back in 2008, that if NATO invites countries to join, but then leaves them sort of hanging out there in a perpetual purgatory, it exposes them to greater risk without providing them with the additional protection. Let's not repeat that mistake with Finland and Sweden. Now that they have crossed the Rubicon into joining NATO, let's move rapidly with that. And the next part is that now that finally NATO is being successful in persuading its member states to drum up a lot more money for defence, we all welcome that, to be crystal clear on what the money is going to be spent on. Defence, it's very easy, as you know, Madam Chairman, to waste a lot of money very quickly to get short-term capability which is obsolete in 4 or 5 years. And the Ukraine crisis has shown that NATO urgently needs to stock its military equipment. It's amazing that just after sort of a month or so, or 3 months of war with Ukraine, a lot of the weapon stocks in NATO have been depleted. And so clearly a lot of that money will need to be spent on restocking, but some of it also has to go for investments in things that we're going to need in 20 or 30 years' time. There's a real challenge there for NATO and the European Union with their common investment programmes to come up with a strategy of how to spend the money wisely before the contracts given to the defence companies. So first of all, fill that NATO security vacuum, make deterrence something where NATO is able to actually fight and win if necessary. Second thing, it's essential that Ukraine comes out of this conflict in a stronger position than Russia. And of course, the jury is still out. Things are still in the balance. It's going to be a long-term effort. Leaders like Jens Stoltenberg have been warning about Ukraine fatigue over the last couple of days. On the other hand, the West has organised, with the contact group, now a fairly effective system for channeling the weapons to the Ukrainian forces, providing the training that they need. And so this effort has to be maintained. Because clearly, if Russia wins and Ukraine loses, all bets are off when it comes to any plan to integrate the eastern neighbourhood into the EU or the NATO structures in the future. So we've got to have a pretty good sense of what is desirable, but what is feasible. Because what is desirable is not always feasible, and what is feasible is not always desirable, of course, over that long run. If Ukraine suffers defeats, like at Severodonetsk, some people may argue that that's a reason not to give them weapons. They have lost the war, when to my mind it's an even more urgent reason to give them what they need. So make sure that Ukraine emerges still as an economically functional democracy linked to Europe. The third thing is that this war has shown us the immense capacity of Russia to do us harm. Not simply by killing lots of innocent people, but by unleashing a humanitarian crisis, an environmental crisis, a food crisis, by using the energy weapon against us, and so on. And so clearly part of this regional strategy has got to be to reduce that capacity of Russia to do us harm. The EU has made a good start, of course, with the energy. In the energy sector, we've been working on resilience, we have sanctions, and clearly some of those, whatever happens with a Ukrainian settlement, have got to be maintained for the long run. And I think NATO in particular needs to turn its attention in Madrid to a serious technology transfer regime to make it hard for Russia to reconstitute its armed forces based on sophisticated Western electronics and technologies after the conflict. The fourth element is to complete the unification of Europe. I mean, the Ukraine conflict has had a kind of cloud in a silver lining, despite the tragedy, in that we started after the Second World War integrating and unifying the first third of Europe. At the end of the Cold War, we integrated the second third of Europe, and now the Ukraine crisis has turned our attention to integrating the final third of Europe, to making the European Union commensurate with Europe. As a geographical entity. This is a great step forward, but implementing it is going to be unbelievably hard. You know, I see lots of fatigue over the enlargement process. You know, they pretend to reform and we pretend to integrate them as we go forward. We know how difficult this is, but now that the Rubicon has been crossed, it's going to be absolutely essential that both NATO and the EU work on a really serious strategy to make this happen, and a form of progressive integration, whether you call it a Macronist European political community or something else, step by step, reward for reform, not a you get everything at the end but nothing in the meantime. That, I think, is going to be really a massive, massive challenge. And at the time when the EU is stepping forward with the final integration of the last third of Europe, it's very important that NATO NATO, particularly now that Ukraine will not be seeking membership in the near term, not step back from that effort behind a collective defence war. Finally, deterrence in the grey zone. One of the things that we've found is really difficult, and Taiwan, of course, is the issue that we're looking at the moment, but it's very difficult to deter aggression against non-member states, even if they're close partners. And Finland and Sweden have, of course, drawn the conclusions from the Ukraine conflict in now seeking NATO membership. We've tried the mother of all sanctions. We've tried the security guarantees of the Budapest Memorandum. We've tried all kinds of warnings, and they have not particularly helped. But we still have, of course, the fate of Georgia to look at. We still have Moldova. We still have potentially other territories. And I think one of the things that we really need to think about quickly is how can we prevent Putin invading other countries in the region? What lessons may there be from Ukraine about how we try to secure greater deterrence in the grey zone, and how can we apply those urgently and quickly to countries like Georgia before they are attacked? I'm not arguing that the answer is easy, but that is an area where unfortunately our policy has not been successful with the tragic consequences that we see. So yes, Belarus, absolutely, but if we can also work on the wider region, the ultimate effort hopefully will be easier and more successful. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Jamie. It appears I was able to cut just part of your bon mots, but thank you for this excellent message, and also for mentioning Georgia with reflection about this country and our criticism. We see the challenge of the time, and in my case, I still strongly support Georgia's accession to the EU as well. Now, time for the transatlantic component. My next speaker can be introduced very shortly. I have this in my instructions. Brian Whitmore, the Atlantic Council, but believe me, he is really the outstanding expert on many issues, and Belarus in particular. Brian, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for that introduction that's far better than I probably deserve. In a perverse way, I'm a little bit grateful to Putin and Lukashenko right now, because they've taken the mask off. They've allowed us to stop pretending the way we've been pretending for the past several decades, pretending that if we engage Russia, they will have a stake in the international order and behave in a less revisionist and less revanchist way. If we engage Lukashenko, perhaps he will be less repressive at home, release a few political prisoners in exchange for easing sanctions, and perhaps maybe even disassociate himself with Russia. We've been playing this game for a while. I myself have been guilty of it at certain points in my career, certainly not in the latter part of my career, but at certain points earlier in my career. And I do think we kind of owe a debt of gratitude to Putin and Lukashenko in a really perverse way, because the mask is off now. The mask is off. There are no more illusions. There's no more pretending. And we can kind of move on with the world that we're entering in. In addition to being a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, I'm also a professor at the University of Texas at Arlington. And one of the things I tell my students over the last couple of semesters as this war was coming into focus is that I'm certain of one thing. We appear to be moving into a world that resembles more the world I grew up in, the Cold War world that I grew up in, than this optimistic, globalized, neoliberal world that they grew up in. We're moving into something that's very familiar to me, that I understood for the first 30 years of my life, but that they had not yet experienced. This generation had not experienced the Cold War, and we're moving into that, and we're in the very early stages of it right now. We're in 1947 right now, where the lines are being drawn in this new, and I want to be careful how I phrase this, specifically in this building, this divided broader Europe, if you will. I don't mean by Europe, I don't mean the EU by any stretch of the imagination. I mean a divided broader Europe. Where are the dividing lines in this new world we're entering into? Where will Ukraine fall in this new configuration? Where will Belarus fall in this new configuration? And these two things are related. These two things are certainly related. If Ukraine wins and preserves its freedom and independence and sovereignty, then I think it is probably highly likely that Belarus is going to be free too. Because Putin is going to be weakened and Lukashenko is going to lose his only patron. And I think it will only be a matter of time. It will actually probably resemble very much what we saw in former communist Eastern Europe in 1989. The minute it is clear that the patron in Moscow is not going to support these repressive regimes, they fell like dominoes. And I think this is going to happen not just in Belarus, but elsewhere in the former Soviet space as well, if Ukraine wins. If Ukraine loses and if Russia emerges victorious, well, I think it's very clear what's going to happen in Belarus. What little bit is left of their sovereignty is going to evaporate. So this kind of, to kind of paint this stark picture of really what is at stake here, we are either going to have a united Europe that goes right up to the border of the Russian Federation, or we're going to have a revival of the core parts of the Russian Empire, Ukraine and Belarus. And as we all know from studying history, every single Russian empire, every single Russian imperial project in history begins with Ukraine and Belarus, but no Russian imperial project in history ever stopped with Ukraine and Belarus. Just to get to kind of iterate what's at stake here. And so the map of Europe is being decided, but the result is not overdetermined. A lot of it depends on decisions we make. And by we, I'm using the collective we as the transatlantic we. Decisions on both sides of the Atlantic are going to determine how this plays out. The decisions we make now will decide this. 100 years ago, this year, in 1922, in December 1922, the Soviet Union was formally founded after the Red Army achieved military victories in Ukraine, in Belarus, in what was then called the Transcaucasus Republic, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And these were the first four republics of the Soviet Union: the Russian Republic, the Ukrainian Republic, the Belarusian Republic, and the Transcaucasian Republic. The world wasn't really watching and paying attention back then. The world is paying attention now. We will have no excuse if we allow this to happen again, because we are witnessing one of two things right now. We are witnessing either the revival of the latest iteration of the Russian Empire, or we are witnessing the very final stage of the long death of the Soviet Union. Hopefully, and it's in our hands. It's not just hope, it's what we do. It's in our hands to affect that future. So I promise I'd keep my remarks brief, and I'm going to keep my promise, and I'm going to stop there to leave more time for question and answering for my friend Batu to speak as well.
Thank you very much indeed for Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Ambassador Batu Kutelia, the Georgian expert, very experienced diplomat, and moreover, Deputy Minister of Defense of Georgia during Russian war in Georgia in 2008. Well, very close co-worker to many MEPs, including myself. We really frequently profit from his expertise. Now, also working for the Atlantic Council of Georgia, but very frequently active in Washington, D.C. But the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for leading the very important process of fighting for our freedom and yours. And you and Ambassador Žygis Paviljonis taking a lot of initiatives that consequentially will lead us to finish the unfinished job of Europe whole, free and in peace. That has been started when Soviet Union Cold War ended and Soviet Union dissolved. And unfortunately, but after several successful waves of expanding idea of the free world and Europe, not only organizationally expanding European Union and NATO, but it stopped somewhere at our doorsteps, at the doorsteps of the oppressive nations that have been part of the Soviet occupation, but till today we cannot fully enjoy of this idea. Speaking of the perverted emotions, as Brian mentioned, I have some kind of a perverted jealousy towards the new generation who has the pleasure of being in this fight and being inspired by the idea of the freedom, because I remember how we were under the Iron Curtain, were inspired by the global leaders and the free world dissolving the Soviet Union, empire of evil. And branding is also important. And exactly this empire of evil has been resurrected because of this unfinished job. And it creates quite a grave danger. Even it became offensive. And now we see the autocrats of all sorts and make, led by Putin, and quite a number of them with different motivations, but still under the same agenda, to undermine the idea of the liberal democracy. And they became, their oppression and their state capture became offensive. They went transnational. They support each other. Georgia faces its own problems domestically. But we are holding the line. Ukrainians physically with the weapons in hand holding the line right now very bravely. Belarusians opposing globally and also within the Belarus, sitting in the jail, they are holding the line. Georgians now demonstrating against the state capture, and yesterday we had hundreds, thousands of us demonstrating for Europe and against the state capture. We are holding the line. And for us to get to the final goal irreversibly, to reach the state where we will feel happy, of course we have to materialize what Kalinowski was saying under the gallows. Only then we can be happy when Russia will not be above us or dictating our way of life. And that's what they are trying to do. And this threat is hybrid. Everything has been weaponized. We've seen it, starting with the information, technology, culture, sports, history, this perverted version of interpretation of the history that Putin is trying to impose on all of us. But our reply should be swift. And I think there are a few important steps that can lead us to the final victory. And I have this feeling or the emotion now recurring back, how we felt that Soviet Union still was there, but it was already in its last phase. For this, we need, first of all, very importantly, assertive steps from the West. We need the leadership, and in that thing also transatlantic leadership or transatlantic unity and the US leadership is important. And we've seen it in a number of cases. Second, the assistance and the help. West and we all need to be more nimble in terms of financial assistance, military assistance, technical assistance, but most importantly, in terms of supporting the idea of Europe, whole and free and peace, and make it inspirational. Because we all know we've been in different ways in the front line. When you are fighting the enemy brutal and big as Russia is, besides the capabilities and the motivation, you need an inspiration. And unfortunately, but the last 14 years, democracy somehow paused or stopped to be inspirational. And it is coming back now with the brave fight of Ukrainians physically, and the mask is off. So we see the real face of the empire of evil, and we definitely need to strive to save this face one way or another, and this phrase of face saving for Russia. We can speak of not intimidating Russians only once Putin's empire is defeated. Then we can afford us being generous and speaking about face saving or anything else. But first, we have to prevail. And to prevail, we need to be offensive. It's time to have a freedom and democracy on offensive. Otherwise, it will not be inspirational. And in terms of the unfinished job and the particular component of it, now we speak a lot of about the assistance, supporting opposition, Belarusian opposition in their fight. But also, I think we have to have a big idea or a grand strategy, what this fight is for. It's not only about only tactical wins here and there, or particular resolution here or this statement there. It should be holistic approach, and under this holistic approach, we have to undermine and explain to the ones who are holding this line that they are part of the bigger idea. And this idea is, again, I am repeating, Europe, whole and free and peace. And only then Europe will be saved from the dangers. And there is huge gap in terms of the security. We can speak about the Marshall Plan, we can bring all the historical experiences, but Marshall Plan would not have been that successful if NATO was not created, were not being created. So without security, without NATO expanding and guaranteeing, unfortunately, but till today we see that there are no security institutions that are ready and capable to defend our freedom and our values. So I'll stop here, and I'm happy to engage in discussion, question and answers. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Baiba Braza already mentioned that there are Belarusians fighting in Ukraine. The Nation Battalion already expanded, and well, I would like to give the floor to remote speakers fighting there in Ukraine for freedom, yours and ours, Belarusians on the side of Ukrainians, members of the Kalinowski regiment, because it is regiment, there in Ukraine. We were able to record it thanks to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Floor is there.
Перших дзён паўнамаштабнага расійскага наступу супраць Украіны сотні беларускіх добраахвотнікаў прыйшлі на дапамогу братэрскаму украінскаму народу.
Hundreds of volunteers from Belarus have been supporting our brothers. A regiment and then a bigger unit was set up, named after Kalinowski. Konstanty Kalinowski is an important historical persona and a symbol of courage. We are fighting against Russianism, and we are fighting hand in hand with our Ukrainian brothers. We believe in liberation. Soon our Ukrainian brothers, our brothers in arms, will be supporting us in our fight for freedom, and we will be proud to carry the standard. Long live Belarus, glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes.
Voice of members of the European Parliament, members of Foreign Affairs Committee were invited to contribute to a variety of panels. We have Polish MEP, former Foreign Minister of Poland here in the chamber, Radosław Sikorski. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The trouble with speaking towards the end is that all the clever things have already been said. Congratulations also on naming the conference after Konstanty Kalinowski, who I believe should be both an inspiration and a warning. An inspiration as regards his courage, his Belarusian patriotism, but a warning as a result of, as regards the result of his efforts. Because he, as you know, was the leader of the January uprising in 1863, the plenipotentiary of the uprising for the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. But he ended up being hanged in a square in Vilnius at the end of that ill-conceived and tragic uprising. The uprising was started with insufficient resources, without international support, when the Russian army was strong in the area. And its failure meant half a century of consolidated Russian rule over the former Polish, Lithuanian, Belarusian, Ukrainian lands. So I think the thought is how to do it better, how to succeed. I think the European Union's policy has been pretty consistent for the last 30 years. Namely, when Lukashenko tries to get a little bit autonomous, we encourage him. When he releases political prisoners, we reward it. And when he plays along with Russia, we try to raise the costs to Russia of dominating Belarus, but the results have not been satisfactory yet. How does a nation of 10 million become independent of control by a nation of 145 million? It's not easy. I think as long as President Putin is in charge of Russia, we can be fairly certain he will do his utmost to keep control over Belarus. Liberation usually happens when a regime goes bust and can't pay its security forces, when there are splits within the ruling regime, when it loses its international protection, or when the dominating country, the metropolis, has some either collapses entirely or at least has a succession crisis. And what is an essential part of a transition to freedom is that there should be an alternative elite capable of taking responsibility. And on this front, I think Belarus has been doing rather well recently. We have Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya with a group of representatives all around the world, in fact, who is a recognized leader of the Belarusian opposition. And we now have this military unit in Ukraine. And we also have a conflict in Ukraine, which the Russians are not guaranteed to win. In fact, it's not going according to plan. They lost the Battle of Kiev, they lost the Battle of Kharkiv. And in Donbass, for a month they've been fighting over a town of 100,000 people. When the equipment from the West makes it finally to the front line, this might decide not just the fate of the battle for Donbass, but actually of the Russian regime. So my advice to our Belarusian friends is to build up your networks, build up your capacity, build up your readiness, but wait for the right revolutionary moment. Don't do it prematurely. Because the result of the January uprising were terrible. Tens of thousands of people sent to Siberia, tens of thousands of estates confiscated. It really destroyed the capacity for resistance. So organize, and wait for the right moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your remarks. It looks that one of our speakers that was not connected is now able to speak, connected remotely, and it is Ukrainian voice, Alexei Goncharenko, well known to many of us. great supporter of free Belarus within the Verkhovna Rada, Ukrainian MP. Well, I think that Ukrainian defense of their country changes a little bit. So that's remarked to you, Radosław, as well. Hopefully changes our views on ill-conceived battles, because it is really a miracle how well they do with really limited resources. Hopefully we are able to give them, to deliver much more than now, and enable them to really win Russia. And you are right that Russia's victory is not guaranteed. Moreover, all of us, we look forward to Russia being defeated. Thank you.
Hello, dear colleagues. I hope you hear me. Yeah, I hope that you hear me now. And first of all, thank you very much for invitation for a very important conference. And I'm now connecting to you from Strasbourg, from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And just minutes ago, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya left past near me, moving to take part in a panel about security in the continent, which is the topic today of today's meeting of Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I think it's extremely important that we are discussing it now. But first of all, I would like to react on the words of guys from Kalinowski Regiment. First month of invasion, I joined territorial defense in Kiev, and I met soldiers and volunteers from Belarus in Kiev, in Irpin, in Bucha, during evacuation missions, on checkpoints, in convoys. And it is an honor for me that we were fighting together, shoulder to shoulder, and they have continued to fight for Ukraine, hundreds of brave Belarus people. By the way, several times today during the conference, I heard the word Belarusian, Belarussia. I just want to address to you colleagues just to forget this name. We are fighting for Belarus. Belarus can and should be and will be free. Belarusia never will be free. And it's Russia who is calling them Belorussia, like they call it Nova Russia, Mala Russia, and so on about Ukraine. We are Ukraine, they are Belarus, they are Belarusian people, and they are our brothers, and they want freedom as all of us. And I think they will have this freedom. I'm sure about this. What I want to tell you, two things. One, the name of our conference, of this panel, is the role of Lukashenko's regime in this awful war. And we should say clear, Lukashenko is a criminal. He is absolutely guilty of this war of aggression. According to United Nations, if you give your territory for the war of aggression, you're also aggressor. No matter are your soldiers on the are inside of battles or not. So Lukashenko is guilty. No trades with Lukashenko, no deals with Lukashenko, and the most strict possible sanctions against his regime. No lifts and no games about I will put your cereal and you will give me possibility to sell something else. Nothing. It's an absolutely guilty person. He is a vassal of this neo-fascist regime, which is Putin's regime. And I can prove that it's neo-fascist regime for sure. And second thing, words that it is a battle for freedom. And I want to agree absolutely. And that is a battle of freedom, not only in Ukraine, Belarus, Eastern Europe. No. I think that today we are on the crucial moment. It is the battle between free world and not free world, and dictators. Not the nations who are suppressed by these dictators, but the dictators themselves and their regimes. And today, we need, the only answer is be brave enough. Be brave like Ukraine. Dear Anna, you said about that Ukraine made a miracle. That is a miracle of Ukrainian spirit, not of weaponry, nothing, but of Ukrainian spirit, because we were not afraid of Putin. Unfortunately, many people from both sides of Atlantics are afraid of Putin. And that is something we need to forget about it. All these, the dictators, their food is terror. Their food is this, when people are scared. That is what they make them stronger. So we need to be brave enough not to be afraid of them and to make courageous decisions. Yes, they can be and should be made every day. The end of this week, Summit of European Union, support Ukraine as a candidate, support Moldova as a candidate, and support Georgia as a candidate. Despite the decision of European Commission, my address to you is to support Georgia as the candidate, not let Georgian people to be hostages of one oligarch. No, we need to fight for any nation which is in between two worlds. So we need to fight for Georgians and give them chance to be free. That is in their interest and in our interest. Like you said, and like за нашу и вашу вольность, for your and for ours and your freedom. That should be our slogan always. So Georgia should be supported. Western Balkans should be supported. The next week there will be Madrid summit of NATO. We need to have Finland and Sweden inside. We need to give to Ukraine membership action plan. It's not the best moment. It should be escalation. We need to forget all about this. It is a fight. It is a battle for freedom between a free world and others. So we should be united and strong. When the free world will be united, we will win, no questions about it. But because all these autocratic regimes, all these totalitarian regimes, because Russian regime is already totalitarian regime, all of them are weaker than the free world. But free world is often too much disputes, too much concerns. We need, now that's not the moment. Finally, we are fighting, and we are fighting already with weapons in our hands, not just by speeches and resolutions. So that is my address, and I'm sure that when we will do it, we will win, and Ukraine will be territorial, integral, and free, and Belarus will be free. And together, and Belarus after this should go on to Euro integration, become a member of European Union, then member of NATO. Maybe today it looks like something very far away, but I believe that is the only way for us to fight for every nation, to take them to the free world unity, to the free world union, and in other case, the free world can all expand or shrink. And if we will shrink, that will be the end. And this century would be the worst one. So I think, and I'm sure that we can expand, we can be strong enough, and we will win. Thank you very much.
Alexei, thank you very much indeed, and God bless Ukraine. Colleagues, we have a quick round to wrap up this discussion, 1 minute in this same sequence of statements, each of you, starting with Ambassador Herczyński.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very inspiring conversation. Just one point from my side. As someone mentioned, the possibility to export Ukrainian grain to the world market through Belarus. Just to make sure that there are no misunderstandings, such an option is not on the table. Of course, as European Union, and this has been said very clearly by High Representative yesterday in front of the cameras, we consider what Russia is doing in stopping 20 million tons of grain in Ukraine and preventing this grain from getting to the world market is a war crime. But the possibility to export this grain through Belarus is not on the table. We will not discuss this with Lukashenko, and we will not soften the sanctions in order to let it happen. At the same time, we will do everything we can in order to provide alternatives. And of course, the most sensible alternative is to open Ukrainian ports. and this is the only actually way to ship those massive amounts out of Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you for this remark. Very important. It was Putin's idea to Ambassador Baiba-Braja.
Thank you very much. A few words, and we had not aligned our speaking points with Jamie, even though he knows NATO even better than I do. But I can only agree to what he said in terms of practical steps. What we are doing currently, of course, the security reality has changed. So the military planning in view of Belarus's integration in de facto Russia's operations have also changed the way our military planners, defense planners, what we are looking at, how we are assessing the threats, and so it will be a different posture and a different relationship also on the ground and in planning terms with regard to Belarus. Also, we have to be very clear that Putin wanted less NATO in Russia's proximity. He will get more. There will be more NATO troops, higher readiness troops, ready to defend. NATO is a defensive alliance, ready to defend all allies and all territories. Aligned control and command structures, secure in charge of the whole area of responsibility, wherever it is. So it's a different alliance also as we are looking at in the future. Obviously, defense spending, capabilities, adaptation for the future, these all will be outcomes of NATO summit. The new strategic concept, outlining strategic environments and principles and values. Second, adaptation for the future with all the emerging disruptive technologies, resourcing the alliance, and so on and so forth. And deterrence and defense posture that is appropriate for those security threats that we see today. And again, readiness to work with partners, readiness to engage with partners across the globe, from Asia Pacific to Eastern Europe to Georgia, support to Ukraine, and whenever Belarus is free and its people in charge and ready to stand up to its authoritarian rulers, Belarus also. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam. Ambassador Dirk Schäuble.
Thank you very much. Well, I think a number of lessons to learn also from this discussion today. Most important, stay united. We, as European Union and the West as a whole, with our partners, now of course, in a much closer relationship also with the US again, UK, who has been leading almost, I would say, on Ukraine in many ways. So this needs to be done. United, also the Belarusian opposition and the Belarusian democratic forces should stay united, because only united they will have a chance to oppose the regime successfully. We will help them in doing so. Third, we need a long breath. I call it strategic patience. We need to be, success might not come today or tomorrow, but in the end, the success will be ours. So we need to know that. We need to encourage those who have lost a little bit the engagement, or who are a bit frustrated by lacking progress. We have to work together and to achieve this progress together. And last point, I wanted to offer our services. EU delegation in Minsk is working, is up and running. I'm running it from here as good as I can. If you have any ideas, cooperation ideas, how we can help civil society and activists, please do share them with us. If you have other ideas, send them to us. You will always get a reply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Very important message and very important offer. Hopefully, all of us we use this. Now, Professor Jamie Shea.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. In 15 seconds, I would simply say that the Ukraine conflict has now developed global ramifications. NATO, collective defence, deterrence. The ambassador mentioned that just a moment ago. the impact on the wider world, the food crisis, the cost of living, the battle of the narratives about who is guilty and who's to blame. The EU steps forward with one of its most ambitious ever rounds of enlargement. We all are looking at how to reduce our dependencies on Russia and so on. But Ukraine is important, and we must not, if you like, lose sight of the urgency and the immediate task of making Russia lose in Ukraine as we chase these wider consequences. Because if we get Ukraine right, dealing with the rest will be massively easier.
Thank you very much indeed. Brian Whitmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In conclusion, I'd just like to say that Ukraine and Belarus are saving Western civilization, and they're saving Western democracy. Because we in the established Western democracies have lost our story. We've lost the plot in the past several years. We've forgotten the power of our story. And we've forgotten that freedom isn't free. We've taken it for granted for too long. And what the Ukrainians and the Belarusians on the front lines right now are teaching us is the value of our story. And when this is all said and done, we in the so-called established Western democracies are going to owe a great debt of gratitude to our friends in Ukraine and in Belarus. Thank you.
Yes, we fully echo this. Ambassador Batu Kutelia.
Thank you. Very briefly, also, two things. One, that we used to say when Georgia embarked its rapid democratic transformation, we used to say that Georgia is more than Georgia because of the idea, because of the impact, setting example, and etc. So today, Belarus is more than Belarus. Today, Ukraine is more than Ukraine. Whatever will, so Las Vegas rule does not apply. Whatever will happen in Ukraine will not stay in Ukraine. Whatever will happen in Belarus will not stay in Belarus. Same applies to Georgia, Moldova. Therefore, we are now constructing the new world order. The old order is gone. We might have some sentiments there, but it's gone. And every day, every single decision we make, hourly, daily, European leaders in respective countries, it forms new global security, and including the European security. And the practical thing, in conclusion, key component of the new European security, I strongly believe, many-wise, geostrategically, economically, politically, value-wise, will be Black Sea and the wider Black Sea. So therefore, we need a more clear and precise vision, ideas, and the decisive steps to form the Black Sea as a cornerstone of the European security.
Fully agree. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really deeply grateful to our outstanding panelists for contribution to this conference, excellent contribution to this conference. I think that we have a lot of food for thought. And moreover, inspiration for practical actions in helping our friends, Ukrainians and Belarusians, in supporting countries like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia on their path to the EU, to obtain candidacy status, and I hope that in the next upcoming European Parliament's resolution, there is also mentioning of perspectives for Belarusian society, for Belarus, future free Belarus. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to hand over to my dear colleague Raza Juknevičienė, MEP of Lithuania, former Minister of Defense of this country, to moderate next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Excellent. Thank you. Bardzo dziękuję, naprawdę bardzo było pozytywne.
Okay, over to you. I'll sit and listen.
Dear friends, we have to start our second panel because we are late a little bit because of the first panel was a little bit longer. But I would like to start introducing myself. I am Rasa Juknevičienė, a member of European Parliament from Lithuania. And this conference is very close to our hearts, to the hearts of Lithuanians, and also name of Kastus Kalinowski, as we call him in Lithuania, Kostas Kalinauskas, is really very, very good choice to have exactly this name on the conference. As you know, conferences is in Vilnius already several years. We have this, and now first time in Brussels. So I also want to remind you that it was only in 2017 that the remains of Kalinowski were discovered in Vilnius, together with other fighters of these years against Tsarist occupation. They were buried in the Gediminas Tower hill, if many of you know Vilnius. And Tsarist regime tried to destroy not just the people and their remains, but also their memory. So it's very symbolic that we have this not forgotten. And just like Putin is doing now, trying to destroy memory of nations, not only people, but memory. So when in the summer, on our topic a little bit, when in the summer of 2020 the world saw hundreds of thousands of Belarusians taking to the streets to defend their freedom, many were surprised. Why? Because many believed that Belarusians support the dictator Lukashenko. It was a very widespread narrative. But they were wrong. Nation is alive. Today, Belarusian freedom is locked up in prisons and driven out of the country, but it is alive. That's what our panel is about. In my hands, I have a T-shirt with a picture of Yuri Vlasov. He is a political prisoner from Gomel, a member of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya's campaign staff, sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. There is an European initiative, European Parliament initiative, to launch by a human rights organization, also Libereco, urging MPs and MEPs to become godparents of a Belarusian political prisoner. Yuri is my hero. I do not know if he receives my messages, but I will continue to care about his fate. The last message I received from Libereco came in October 2021. It read, "At the moment, conditions in the Belarusian colonies are equal to torture. The coronavirus is used against prisoners as a biological weapon. Prisoners are not provided with medical care. They are not allowed to observe basic rules of hygiene." Quote ended. And now we will move to start our panel by a short movie about the case of Katerina Andreeva and Daria Chultsova. Please.
дворы и розпочали стрілянину просто у дворы. А тепер нас люди все додому, і ми не на подводі.
Цяпер у дзверы кватэры, дзе мы знаходзімся, пазванілі. Мы не ведаем, хто гэта, але...
Somebody called, we don't know who it was.
Thank you for reminding, and we would like to wish both them and others strong will, and they have to know that we are together with them. And now I have a right as chairing person to change a little bit the order of speakers, because Andrzej Halicki asked me to invite him for his short presentation before he will leave airport. He now is in airport and waiting for the plane to Warsaw. So, Andrzej Halicki, are you connected? He is Polish member of European Parliament here.
Yes, I am.
And
Thank
head
you,
of delegation of Polish EPP delegation. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Rasa, very much. Good morning, dear friends, dear colleagues. Well, I have tears in my eyes when I see the so young faces of such a brave journalists like Katerina and Daria. And of course, I would like to remind also the name of Andrzej Poczobut, the Polish journalist who is in jail and prison. He represents Polish minority in Belarus, and so many brave people. I would like to emphasize one thing, and sorry that I am not with you directly in Brussels because of my personal problems. I had to change the plane. But no one can feel safe in Belarus now. And this is the first conclusion we have to have in mind, because not only politicians, sometimes ordinary people are sent to jail because this is the sign of tyranny. Nobody can dream about freedom, nobody can feel safe, nobody can live in, we can say, normal way. This is the sign of tyranny, but we have to help them, we have to be with them. In Poland we had also such a cruel time during the martial law. Now we are on the other side of life, we are free, we have democracy, we can live as we would like to live. So what we can do together? I think that first of all, the first conclusion is not very easy to say, because I remember some kind of political game. Of course, Lukashenko would like to use political prisoners also to, like a currency, to have some kind of a tool to lift some sanctions, to do some politics, using them as a weapon, as a tool, as a currency. And I think that we cannot allow for such a game. So we have to be very strong and united, because the sanctions are needed. Lukashenko is a war criminal, and his place is in international tribunal. He should finish in tribunal in Hague. And this is not time for political deal or political game with him. We cannot repeat this shameful game again. We have to be strong together. But Rasa mentioned one of the very important initiative, good parenting. and these T-shirts. We have in European Parliament initiative which was supported by more than 100, 200 people altogether. I remember is something like 300 cases of god parenting. But this is not enough. We have more than 1,200 political prisoners. In my case, I have very close contact to family, to Sergei Korshun family. He was sent to prison for 4.5 years. Why? Because he was the manager of IT platform. He was guilty because he would like to give opportunity to exchange the views. It's a very dramatic situation, but we have to be close with him, with the others, with the families. We have to help them and be as close as we can. The rest is still waiting for such a close contact, the postcard, the letters, the questions to the family, how to help, how to organize the life either for them. Every political prisoner has a family. And this is our obligation. Of course, the future has to be also connected with justice. So we have to collect all the cases of crimes, tortures, terror, the physical and psychological pressure on prisoners. We have to collect all this information to find a way to international tribunal in the end. Lukashenko has to finish in Hague. This is my second strong appeal to you. And our dear friends, of course we have to disseminate the information about political prisoners also to the others, to journalists, to everybody, because now we have many different crisis situations like Ukraine. But I would like to end with appeal to you. Let's be united. Let's be strong. We are with you, and I believe that Belarus will be free. And imagine such a day when all these political prisoners will be free and will act and will speak openly about all these dramatic cases. It will change the world, it will change Belarus, it will change all the situation, and I believe that Belarus will be free. Long live Belarus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrzej. Okay. And now one more change. I am inviting for 5 minutes Samuel Kugulati, who is Vice Chair of Foreign Affairs Committee, the Belgian Federal Parliament. He also has to leave, so please, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone. It's a great honor for me to join you this morning for this very important conference. It's also a lot of pleasure to see my good friend Anatoly Lebedko again. I can announce you that no later as yesterday, we received a high-level delegation from the Movement for Political and Democratic Transition of Belarus, led by Mrs. Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya in the Belgian Parliament. And we just announced the creation of a group of Belgian parliamentarians coming from basically the whole political spectrum, from the right, from the left, from the center. And we are committed, and we have committed to defend the political transition, the democratic transition against Lukashenko's regime, and also in defense of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya and her fight for human rights and for the freedom of political prisoners. So it's a great honor for me to come this morning with this good, positive news. It's for us a very important matter. No later than this morning, we held a Committee on European Affairs with the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo. And while we were speaking about the implementation of the 6th packet of sanctions against Russia and against Vladimir Putin, we also insisted on viable sanctions against the regime of Alexander Lukashenko. It is for us of utmost importance to be reliable and to impose strong sanctions against the regime also in Belarus and not only in Russia and not only against the Kremlin. So I really want to tell you that you can count on us also in the Belgian Parliament, also at the domestic national level. Here in Brussels, in the capital of Europe, you can count on our support, on our determination to fight with you for a peaceful, free and democratic Belarus. We have also committed to join the great campaign of Liberico for this God Parenthood program of political prisoners. I am also part of that program already, but we will invite more MPs at the national level in Belgium to join. So again, I call on Europe to play its role in the support of the democratic transition in Belarus. And as Moldova and Ukraine will probably be granted EU candidacy status, I also want to say, as I said this morning to our Prime Minister in Belgium, that we should also recognize a European perspective for the people of Belarus. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let's not be shy in front of Lukashenko's regime, and let's continue to put Belarus very high on the political agenda. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Samuel. And now I am informed that we are connected with Frederic Petit, Member of Parliament from French National Assembly. He will be online.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for inviting me. You said that I'm since today re-elected in my parliament. Then I'm happy. It's my first duty to participate in Kalinowski conference once again after my re-election, and I am very, very proud to that. And for everybody, I will insist on my special constituency because we have a special system in France. I am a French guy but living in Krakow, and I am the member of parliament elected by French people living in Central Europe. I would like to insist on two things during this short speech, and I am sorry to have to leave you in 10 minutes. First of all, I would like to insist about one thing which concerns Belarus and Ukraine, that our population, our citizens, are not aware that somehow, and every people living in this region know that, we are talking about one of the ancestors of the first experience of united in diversity in this region. What was Republic of Two Nations? What was Yiddishland? What was this region made of before the imperialists of the Muscovite, what we called in few cycles ago Muscovite and not Russian? This region was a kind of preparation of what we are calling today united in diversity with 27 nations. Maybe we are today the Republic of 27 nations. And I think it's very important to understand for the sake of Europe that we are not talking about something happening in the periphery and so on. We are talking about what the European project is since cycles, that we want to fight, we are different, but we are human beings and we don't fight, we negotiated united in diversity, united even in conflict. That's the first thing that I want to remember. Second thing, because we are talking about prisoners, we are talking about people in jail, young people in jail for 2 years, 3 years in horrible things. Maybe some of you know that I'm following that since 3 years before, even before the election of the false election. Every day I am informing all my followers, every day about one people, and there is more people in jail that I have days since the beginning of I'm doing this job. I think that it's the main role of us, member of parliament, of national parliaments. I think we are the interface, we are representing our people, and our people has to know what it's about. They are too much informed from far. I think that nobody is understanding what will be the consequence for our citizen in few months, economical consequence. It will be hard. It will be hard to be with Ukraine, to be with Belarus in few months, in 1 year, because it will touch our citizens. If we, member of parliament, we are not explaining that, we are not fighting to say, okay, it's not only a theater, it's not only, we are talking about our lives. And that's our job, and we have to make this job. And my appeal would be to, you know, that I also created here in the French Parliament, I created a group of contact with the Belarus opposition in exile. We are creating a lot of civil cooperation with students, with people looking for jobs and so on. My appeal would be that we have to structure this job, this cooperation on the civil society. And I think the Kalinowski conference should be something in few months, in few years, equal to the Munich conference for security in Europe. We have to make new structure in order for all the citizenship, all our citizenship, to understand that we are not talking about theater. We are talking about the real thing of our lives and of the lives of people 25 years in jail for 5 or 15 years, and we are in liberty, but they are also us. It's also, we are talking about our future in this crisis, and I think that this job has to be structured, has to be reinforced as an institution. Europe is not only the Brussels institution that everybody is criticizing. Europe could be also this kind of conference, citizen conference, member of parliament conference, and to be sure that our society will understand when it will be a little harder to support our colleagues and our population in Belarus. Geopolitical.
Merci beaucoup. Now we will move on our agenda further. Pavel Sapelko, lawyer, Human Rights Center, Vesna, online.
Добрий день. Дякую за представлену.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to take part in this conference. For years, we have been living under pressure. In 2020, since 2020, we have been living under pressure. Tens and dozens and hundreds of people have felt the repressions, have fallen victim to the torture of the regime. Many people disappeared without a trace. The guilty have not been held accountable. So that's why we need to do our utmost to collect evidence to prove that crimes against humanity are being committed in Belarus. This is our task for the years to come. Over the last 2 years, many people have been imprisoned for political reasons. At least 50,000 people who have participated in protests have been detained. They have been stripped of their dignity. They have been tortured. They have been beaten up. And these are the crimes that must not go unpunished. Because if they go unpunished, they will continue forever. More than 1,200 people have been convicted in political trials. There are 1,200 political prisoners, as defined by human rights centers. We have 7 individuals who worked for the Vyasna Human Rights Center. I would like to emphasize the plight of political prisoners. We need to remember about them. We cannot forget them. It is a tragedy for their lives. It's a tragedy for their families, and this requires us and the politicians to never lose sight of the priorities that we must all recognize. We need to work together. For example, in 2020, in Belarus, there was a certain type of a public uprising, and that's why we need to build on that to help political prisoners. Sometimes we are tempted to just look at these facts as something that belongs to history. We tend to focus on other priorities and goals and objectives, but I would like to appeal to you to adopt a critical view of the effectiveness of the steps that are being taken against the regime. We need to support any action against the regime because the regime has been growing stronger for too many years now. It is holding active Belarusian campaigners hostage. Sometimes it might seem that our dreams are impossible to attain, but let me tell you that on the 24th of February 2022, something changed. And we now need to look at the situation in Belarus with different eyes. Why? Because the Lukashenko regime became involved in the war of aggression against Ukraine, but that was something that could have been anticipated. We do know how the regime operates. Over the last 2 years, we have seen that the regime is pulling all stops in order to ensure its continuity in future, and that's why it resorts to crimes against humanity in Belarus. Belarusian citizens cannot be held jointly accountable for those crimes. It is something we need to regret, that there is this notion of collective responsibility that is being used against our citizens. And that's why, as we act against the regime, we need to make sure that the action that we take is something that supports Belarusian people of all generations. It's important to hold the perpetrators accountable for crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introduction and for everything you are doing, of course. Now I will give the floor to Oleg Gulak, the chairman of the Belarusian Helsinki Committee, also online.
Так, добрый день, сябры, коллеги. Я вдячний за ту.
Welcome, friends. Welcome, colleagues. Thank you so very much for giving me the opportunity to address you and to discuss my thoughts and my comments, my suggestions. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to take part in this very important conference. I would like to build on what Pavel has just said. Let me emphasize and underscore that we should really look closely at what is happening in Belarus. Things are not improving. More and more people are detained every day. Repressions are rife. The Belarusian regime wants to suppress any action taken by the Belarusian people to attain freedom. Repressions are directed against active campaigners who oppose the regime, and also against all peacefully minded citizens, even if they're not very actively opposing the regime, but still the repressions are also directed against them. They can affect every single Belarusian citizen. People are being detained, they are being fired, they cannot find employment. We can see that there is a shortage of medical doctors and personnel in Belarus because medical doctors used to be very active and they were speaking out against the regime. They took part in protests and demonstrations. They were fighting for their freedom, and that's why they were forced to leave the country, to emigrate. They felt threatened in their own homes, in their own country. Some experts and some specialists were detained, they are imprisoned, and we can also see that schools are now used as a channel for the propaganda of the regime, and the situation is far worse than during the Soviet Union times. So propaganda is directed against the youngest generations of Belarusians. Ladies and gentlemen, we have very little time. We really need to act now. We need to solve those problems today. And we do understand that there are some pressing issues that we need to face. The first is the security of Ukraine. We need to stop the war of aggression against Ukraine, but we should also remember that there are important problems in Ukraine and in Belarus as well. And those problems are problems of the Belarusian people, of course. But we also need to try to support the civic society. With a strong civic society, the territory of Belarus could not be used in the war of aggression against Ukraine. There is also another key task that we need to mention. I am not only referring to the military dimension and the security dimension, because we need to learn from history. And what does history teach us? It teaches us that cooperation is the only way to go. We need to cooperate in terms of the economy, in terms of human rights, to create a stable world where everyone will be able to live in peace. Of course, these are some self-evident truths, but we need to open people's eyes to them. People tend to forget about them and take them for granted, and that is one of the reasons why the right mechanisms were not created to prevent such situations as the situation we are now facing in Ukraine. That's why we need to change the situation from the ground up. We need to create the right foundations. We need to work with the Council of Europe. That's something that is very relevant. Let me also refer to one more institution that is not used to its full potential. I am talking about the United Nations, the UN. It is not always used, and sometimes we do not tap into its full potential. As regards the situation in Belarus, we need to work together to promote our shared values so that they are upheld by everyone. And I am deeply convinced that, yes, we will be able to lay the groundwork to create the foundations for a new reality. And once again, let me tell you that I do stand with Belarus and with Ukraine. Thank you very much to the members of the European Parliament and to our partners from Europe for supporting us. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. And as well, everything, what are you doing? And I think Belarus will be free and we will live together in one free space very soon. Now I would like to move to another side of the ocean. David Kramer, Managing Director for Global Policy, George Bush Institute. Many around in this room, of course, know very well. David Kramer was United States Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor from 2008 to 2009. He was President of Freedom House from October 2010 to November 2014. David, we can see you, and now we would like to hear from you. Floor is yours.
Raza, thanks so much, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm just sorry not to be with you there personally in Brussels, but I'm joining you from Dallas, Texas, where I now live and work at the George W. Bush Institute as Managing Director of Global Policy. I mentioned the Bush name because it was during the Bush administration, in fact, in 2006, when I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasia, responsible for Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, and Belarus, when we imposed the first major series of sanctions on the Lukashenko regime, together very closely working with our European friends, including you, Raza, and Žygas Pavlonis and others in Lithuania. And this was because of Lukashenko's fraudulent election and the imprisonment of 8 political prisoners. And during the next 2 years, we continued to ramp up our sanctions, insisting on the release of these political prisoners. We valued each and every single individual, and it took until 2008, 2 years after the start of these sanctions, to secure the release of Alexander Kazulin, the last political prisoner held at that time. And the importance of that is that we kept increasing sanctions until they produced the rather limited result that we were aiming for, which was the release of political prisoners. Unfortunately, as you and your audience know all too well, the situation has only gotten vastly worse. The 2010 election and the violence that ensued after that, the 2020 completely stolen election by Lukashenko, in which we saw unprecedented violence against peaceful protesters, and as your previous speakers have touched on, more than 1,000 political prisoners these days. And from that, we have seen that how Lukashenko treats his own people is indicative of what he will do to others. And so we saw the hijacking of the Ryanair flight last year. We saw the weaponization of migrants. Lukashenko and his regime are a threat to European stability, European security. They are a threat to the human rights not only of the people of Belarus, but to people everywhere. And then in 2022, of course, we see Lukashenko as an accomplice to Putin's war against Ukraine, to war crimes committed against the Ukrainian people, crimes against humanity, and genocide. To be clear, these are not the actions of the people of Belarus, many of whom are trying to resist Lukashenko's complicity with Putin's war crimes. But these are the crimes of Alexander Lukashenko and those who support him. And as others have said, he very much deserves a place right alongside Mr. Putin in The Hague for one day when justice will be properly served. The people of Belarus deserve much better. And yesterday in the United States, for the second time, a federal holiday was observed called Juneteenth. This was a holiday marking in 1865, the announcement to slaves in Galveston, Texas, that they were now free after a very bloody civil war in the United States, almost 160 years ago. African Americans were then granted in complete terms, not until 100 years later under the Civil Rights Act, and still struggle to this day to be treated as equal citizens. But I mention this because I know that one day Belarus will have its own kind of Juneteenth. It will celebrate the day when it will be free and liberated from the repression of Alexander Lukashenko and be lifted out from under the thumb of Mr. Putin. And so I join all of you in solidarity with the people of Belarus and stress the importance of transatlantic cooperation and ties in supporting freedom in that country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Good luck. Hope to see you soon in Brussels. Now I will move to Ales Zarembuk, head of the Belarusian House in Warsaw.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Okay.
Dear distinguished guests, first of all, I would like to thank Madam Minister Anna Fotyga for organizing this Kalinowski conference and for the opportunity to meet such an honorable group yesterday and to talk about the current situation in Belarus. 4 years, Poland has been an advocate for Belarusian affairs in the West. And after the dramatic events of 2020, Poland is particularly committed to supporting Belarusian society and fighting for its neighborhoods, democracy and independence. Our organization supports Belarusian families in Poland in various ways. For example, before the beginning of the school year, we gave away about 200 school backpacks. Before Christmas and the New Year, we gave away about 100 presents. During the ongoing migration crisis, our 300 non-governmental organizations were closed down in Belarus. In the last year, the number of political prisoners has increased by almost 1,300 people in this moment. About 50,000 people suffer from repression directly, and new sentences are handed down every day. They torture political prisoners, keep them in extremely small cells where a person is held alone, in extremely inhuman conditions. For example, one cannot sit all day. Another example is cells intended for 4 people, but where 20 people are held with no access to sunlight. Presently, massive numbers of people who work for state companies and government agencies are being dismissed from their jobs if they supported the nomination of opposition candidates in 2020. It should be understood that most of the activities that existed and were possible before August 2020 no longer possible today. Most of Belarusian society does not want and cannot live as before. Total and complete rejection of the dictatorial political regime has arisen among the Belarusians. People who were involved in activities that are not even related to politics cannot act anymore. I'm talking here, for example, about environmental or animal protection activities. The example of the bird protection organization in Belarus, which was disbanded recently, only confirms this. Any disclosed scheme of financial support for civil society, both international and domestic, qualifies as funding protests or even terrorist activities. That is why it is very important to support Belarusians districtly and wisely. In fact, a second parallel society is being created in the Lukashenko state. People have massively united into local groups. The KGB people understand this perfectly well. Therefore, such local groups and initiatives, even those that are not aimed at changing the political agenda, but deal only with mere social activity, also destroyed with extreme brutality. People are openly ridiculed, dehumanized, and repressive state organs create unbearable conditions for their existence in their homeland. In such a situation, meaning the spark of hope for change is the most important task of those civic and social cycles that still survive in Belarus. The work we do in Belarus requires full discretion and individual approach, individual contact with trusted partners and clarifying their needs and capabilities. There are dozens of public initiatives within Belarus. Thousands of activists who are our partners do not want to emigrate from Belarus. Lukashenko has political and financial support from Putin, but Belarusian society still believes in help from the European Union. We do expect support from the West, humanitarian, political and financial support. And now humanitarian support for Kalinowski regiment, medical support. A good example of such support is the Polish support program for the repressed called Solidarity with Belarus. It is an example of effective help for thousands of repressed people, students, women, families and children, civil society organizations and free media. However, the changes will take place inside Belarus, in places such as Minsk, Grodno, Homel, and not in Vilnius or Warsaw. Therefore, first of all, it is very important to support civil society inside the country, not only in exile. It is becoming more and more difficult because Lukashenko's regime effectively closes the space for such help. But we are very creative in response to repression and despite intimidation, Belarusians are inventing new forms of peaceful resistance. We don't know when or under what circumstances these changes will take place, but we are convinced that this moment will definitely come. We are grateful for the EU comprehensive economic plan for democratic Belarus, which was initiated by Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and adopted by the European Commission. It gives our people great hope that the Union will help us to carry out quick and effective reforms after we win in the new Belarus. Together we must do everything in our power so that this process goes peacefully, Belarus becomes a democratic, predictable and independent state, and Belarusians became friendly neighbors and reliable partners. For you, freedom and ours, and long live Belarus.
Yeah, Žive Belarus.
Žive.
And now I invite and would like to give the floor to Katya Dekanoidze from Georgia, Member of Parliament, Georgian-Belarus Friendship Group. And first of all, I would like to say very warm words because of yesterday's very large, huge demonstration in Tbilisi, which, as I was told, is the first as big as it was yesterday during independent Georgian history. So Georgian attempts, Georgian people aspirations towards the European Union is very clear, and you have many friends in this parliament, friends of Georgia in different political groups, but unfortunately your government, not your government, but government in Georgia of today, they are doing everything the best to attack friends here and not to have anyone would be able to advocate for this government. What they are doing is maybe opposite. But that's a little bit from Belarus to Georgia, because my pleasure was to invite you to say some words.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rosa. First of all, it's a great honor to be here and talking to my friends and Georgia's and Belarus and of course Ukraine's friends. And I want to thank you as a great friend of Georgia, and we know how amazing things and definitely your attitude to Georgia, and thank you for your warm words. Thank you, Anna. I know how definitely you are so much involved for the freedom of Georgians, for the freedom of Belarusians, and the freedom of Ukrainians also. And thank you, everybody is here. And I'm definitely very glad to see my Belarusian friends here. And actually, I'm so happy to be the part of the fighters for Belarus in Georgia. It's just now we are establishing the group of Georgia and Belarus and within the parliament. Well, the panel, the name of our panel is People of Freedom, Repressions and Situation of Political Prisoners. And for sure, I have to say that the Georgians, Belarusians and Ukrainians are the people of freedom, fighting for the security of Europe, and the fighting for the future, because I mean, but the Russian aggression in Ukraine, I mean, made it very clear. I mean, that they made it very clear that there are no blind spots in Europe and in the world. Russian aggression in Ukraine made it clear to everybody that there is no place for dictators, there is no place for oligarchs, and there is no place for Putin, Lukashenko in this world. So I'm definitely, we had the same situation in 2008, actually. I mean, when Russia attacked Georgia, and it was, well, definitely short war, but I have to admit and I have to say that, 2008, 2009, and our friends know that we had been screaming all over the world that if the West will not have the reaction, I mean that the reaction, it is important, and it was important, and there will be next will be Ukraine. Unfortunately, it was obvious that Putin would never stop in Georgia. The same with the dictators. Unfortunately, I have to also admit that Lukashenko was kind of, well, everybody understood that the Lukashenko was a person who was keening and leaning to dictatorship. But unfortunately, I mean, still, some gambling with him, and some, understanding that, okay, I mean, he's not the kind of the person from the civilization, but still, I mean, the West and the Western countries, sometimes they were very much cautious about him. Now we understand, all of us, that he is a dictator, and Belarus is occupied also. Actually, when there is kind of talks about political prisoners, I mean, I still believe, and I firmly believe, that Europe is now, I mean, it's not the place for political prisoners. I mean, if we have civilization, if we have the rule of law, if we have order, if we have security, if we have independent judiciary, so that we can't have political prisoners. Unfortunately, when right now just we started about talking about Georgia, but unfortunately in Georgia, I mean, which was a kind of beacon of freedom, and also the, just a, I don't know, in avant-garde of the in progress. Unfortunately, right now we have a man in charge of Georgia who captured the state, and unfortunately we do have political prisoners. I understand there is a huge gap between Belarus and Georgia right now, because in Belarus, I mean, Lukashenko is true dictator. There are about more than 1,000 political prisoners. But, I have to say that, unfortunately, the regimes which are leading to dictatorship, they are just crawling to be this kind of regime. So in Georgia, we got oligarch who also captured the state. I mean, and just recent resolution, parliamentary resolution, was about media freedom. We got political prisoner, founder and the founder of the critical media, Nika Goramia, and he's in jail. We got third president of Georgia, who was the first enemy of Putin, actually in 2008 in the prison. Unfortunately, he is still there. And unfortunately, we are so far from independent judiciary. And just recent decision by the Commission, it was heartbreaking for Georgians when it was a recommendation that, Moldova and Ukraine must be granted candidacy status, but Georgia, must do its homework. Well, we all understand that fighting for freedom means not only fighting from the just exact moment and a short period. We all understand that the fighting for freedom means to fight for it, starting from when we are born and when we are adults and when we are citizens. Unfortunately, we all have Belarusians, Ukrainians, Georgians will have the same past, Soviet Union, which was dark, which was totalitarian. And unfortunately, we all are fighting for the brightest future. First of all, and I know we are short of time, first of all, I have to admit that the world and the West needs very firm and tough measures against dictators, so against Lukashenko, and I understand that the sanctions against him and also sanctions against Putin and dictators must be very tough. Not only, just the words, but also the inaction. This is first. The second, there are no place in Europe, in Georgia, in Belarus, in Ukraine, or in Moldova for oligarchs. And also the resolution which was just adopted in the European Parliament was about the recommendation to sanction Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is an oligarch in Georgia, who captured the state. I call on my partners, our partners, and the friends of Georgia, and as our friends say, we have a lot of friends. Georgian people's got a lot of friends here in European Parliament and in Europe, in Brussels, in France, and everywhere, that when there is a recommendation in the homework by the European Commission, it says de-oligarchization. So de-oligarchization means that the West, the European partners, must help us to sanction Bidzina Ivanishvili and the people who are against democracy, for instance, against human rights, because it means that to assist and support and back up Georgian people in the fight of freedom. Yesterday we got rally. Yesterday, actually, I have to say that in this rally there were a lot of Belarusians also and Ukrainians participating because, after in recent months, a lot of people from Belarus escaped from Lukashenko's dictatorship and from Russia also. But I have to say that, they all understand, and the way we keep, just the red and white flags and Ukrainian flags and Georgian flags, that this is our common freedom. I understand that the future of the security architecture and the future of European security lies beyond Ukraine first, Georgia, free Georgia, very strong Georgia, democratic Georgia, and also free Belarus, because I still believe, and we still believe, Belarus is occupied, and also with Moldova, and of course with a very strong cult of Baltic states and Poland as we used to be before. So thank you very much. The final point will be that we work very hard with the opposition, Belarusian opposition. So we will have the friendship group in September officially launched, and also we want to invite Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya in Georgia to give her a floor, and it will be a great honor for us. But also we must understand, all of us, as Russia said right now, that we have to fight for our own future, because, you know, stopping fighting will never give the result. We have to continue, and we have to be the part of Europe. We are part of Europe, as Georgian people proved yesterday. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good luck. Georgia is very important, and I just want to remind that when Lukashenko came to power, he came with the democratic election, and he started with manipulations, with the lies. So be careful. It is for all of us what's going on in Georgia as well, because dictatorships are coming without, you know, when we are not taking care of democracy every day. So now I move to Vilnius, to Vytis Jurkonis, who is head of Freedom House in Vilnius office. He is online. Vytis, floor is yours.
Let's make no mistake speaking about political prisoners in Belarus. They are political hostages, not political prisoners. Yes, Belarusian regime is taking hostages the way Kremlin does in war against Ukraine. Belarus, this is a terrorist behavior, and we should act accordingly. Belarusian regime was, is, and will continue taking hostages to improve its bargaining position. Belarus, with unprecedented scale of repressions, became a terror state, unfortunately. And there's a question, do countries negotiate with terrorists who take hostages, who are downing airplanes like Minsk did with the Ryanair a year ago? And the answer is yes, they do. There's a wonderful book by a former international hostage negotiator for the FBI, Chris Voss. The title is of it, Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it. And this is exactly what we should do. Don't get to the business as usual. Don't fall again into the trap of balancing. And when we do start negotiating, negotiate as our life, not life of Belarusians, but our life dependent on it. And then I think we'll do fine. People of freedom in Belarus, people of freedom in Ukraine are ringing the bell of freedom, and it's high time for us to wake up, not instrumentalize Belarus, but rather help them win that fight for freedom in Ukraine as well as in Belarus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vytis, for your very short but very concrete intervention. And now I invite Volha Pavuk, co-founder of the European Choice Initiative, online as well.
Okay. Hi to everyone, and let me start by expressing appreciation to Anna Fotyga and Petros Auštrevičius and all Europeans who support Belarus on the international level and who help to feel safe to all Belarusians who is in exile in European countries. I'll continue to speak in Belarusian because I want to emphasize for Belarusian audience that our fight for freedom are not forgotten, and it's being discussed at the high level with our European neighbors. У 2020 ми розпочали нову сторонку білоруської історії.
In 2020, we opened a new chapter in history, which will never be forgotten. 2020 was the beginning of our awakening, the awakening and the rebirth of Belarus. Today we are meeting here at the Kalinowski conference, and history is being written before our very own eyes. What shape that history will take will depend on what Belarusian people do. I am administrator of a website that presents information about civic activities in one of the boroughs of Homo. Sergei Tsikhanouskaya, who created his website in March 2020, was also an active campaigner. We worked together championing the same cause. And this was an initiative that gave voice to our people. I am a representative of a new initiative, a new project, which maybe comes a little bit late, but we know that we need to work and act here and now. The European Choice Initiative was declared in May 2022, and it focuses on our principal objectives. One of those objectives is to see Belarus as a democratic and free member of the European family. We are also championing the release of all political prisoners. We also want to achieve economic progress and reforms modeled on European systems. We want to create a new Belarusian society that will be part of the European society. We are working together with our European partners in political and non-political initiatives. Our people living in Belarus cannot participate in mass events or in protests that would allow them to voice their concerns and their points of view. We are now working together, and we are working thanks to those Belarusian citizens who are living in exile, and we want to give the voice to those of us who have been stripped of the possibility to speak out. Mykolai Statkevich is a political prisoner. He has been detained for the second time due to his political stance. Alexei Zaremby and the Belarusian Association of Belarus Journalists, the Office for Modern Belarusian Education, and representatives of the Office of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya are our representatives who we are also trying to support. There are also other initiatives that deserve our support. Our European partners are supporting us as well. The European Choice Initiative is active and is calling for the acceptance of Ukraine as a member of the European Union. We stand firmly against the regime and we feel that we represent millions of Belarusian people who believe that they are part of the European family, and that is an initiative that is of key relevance, and it will help us decide and help every single Belarusian person to decide whether they want to keep living in fear or whether they want to support our common strive for freedom. I'd like to thank all of those who have reacted and helped us in our work, and we are happy that it's now being worked on. Pavel Latushka, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, we would like to thank you for your constant support. We hope that we will all work together towards becoming part of Europe. Hopefully you will also support us in our work. Lusterko is one of the media outlets that we are using. There is an appeal from Belarusian people who want to integrate with the European Union. They are in favor of greater integration. So yes, we want to appeal to the European Union to accept us, but we also need to work with our citizens to make sure that they support our participation in the European family. I'd like to thank everyone who have helped us to spread the voice, and hopefully we will enjoy greater support in future, and we will be able to act in future as well. In Belarus, we have been fighting the regime for quite some time. Over the last 20 years, we have seen many people suffer painful repressions. We have 1,200 political prisoners who are now being held, and we know that these are official numbers, but probably there are twice as many, so the numbers are quite impressive, you have to admit. But we can say that there is a silver lining, so to speak. Many Belarusian people living in Poland, Lithuania, and in other countries. These countries used to be part of the Soviet Union not so long ago, but they had this great wish to live in democracy and peace and in freedom. They became active and they achieved their freedom, and that's why we want to learn from their history. We need to emphasize that our leaders want to work together with the Belarusian people. We need to work hand in hand. We need to start grassroots initiatives in Belarus, and we also need to work with campaigners who are now living abroad. And I hope that we learn from the mistakes of others, and I hope that we will not repeat the mistakes that were made before 2020. Hopefully we are able to come up with a new strategy, and together we can weather the storm and seek a better future for Belarus and for Europe.
I looked to my watch and I know that we are a little bit late, but not because our panel, but because the first panel was a little bit longer. We took also a little bit more, 5 minutes more. But now I don't know, maybe we will just finish our panel. If someone have some questions, I don't know. And then you will be able to walk after the lunch to have possibility to hear other speakers. So I thank panelists, all of them, at least one left here in presence next to me, and all those were connected online. Everybody, good luck, have a good lunch, and Žive Belarus.